For 22 years, I raised my daughter alone after her mother abandoned us for a new life. For 22 years, I was her world, her only parent. Then her mother, the woman who abandoned us, came back with a rich husband and a big house. My daughter chose them. She even asked me to stay away from her wedding so her new stepfather could walk her down the aisle. But the final blow came in a text message. I changed my last name to escape yours. She thought she was cutting me off for good. What she didn't realize is that the name she just threw away wasn't just my name, it was the key to her entire future. A multi-million-dollar inheritance, a global business, a legacy she never knew I built for her. With that one signature, she didn't just lose a father, she forfeited everything. Lock, stock, and barrel.
Hey, story lover. Welcome to the Narrative Hub, Reddit Stories. Believe me, this adventure gets wild, but it's only epic with you. Seriously, you make this possible. Want more stories? Greater adventure? Smash subscribe right now. Smash like. Comment below. Let's go.
The story doesn't start with that text message, though. It starts 22 years earlier in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and shattered dreams. Helen, the woman I had promised my life to, looked at the tiny, perfect baby in my arms, a daughter we had named Olivia, and she saw a cage. I saw the entire universe. Helen handed me our daughter, her touch as fleeting as a whisper, and said words that would haunt me for 2 decades. I can't do this, David, I'm too young for this. There's a world out there and I refuse to be tied down. And just like that, she was gone, a ghost in the rearview mirror of my life. But what Helen didn't know, what I never told her in those desperate final moments, was the weight of the name she was abandoning. My grandfather, Theodore Jones, had built an empire from nothing. He'd started with a single auto repair shop in 1952 and turned it into a network of industrial holdings that spanned 3 continents. When my father died in a car accident when I was 16, I inherited it all. The boardrooms, the corporate jets, the endless meetings where men in $1,000 suits talked about millions like pocket change. I hated every minute of it. At 18, I walked away. I handed control to a team of trustees and managers, kept just enough to live comfortably, and opened my own garage. I wanted to work with my hands to build something real, something honest. When I met Helen at community college, she thought I was just another working-class guy trying to make ends meet. I let her believe it because that's who I wanted to be. The money sat in trusts and holding companies, growing silently while I lived the life I'd chosen. When Helen left us in that hospital room, I made a decision that would define the next 2 decades. I would raise Olivia as David Jones the mechanic, not David Jones the heir to an industrial fortune. She would learn the value of hard work, integrity, and love that wasn't conditional on bank statements. The empire could wait, my daughter couldn't. So it was just us, David and Olivia Jones. We didn't have much. Our world was a cramped 2-bedroom apartment where the scent of my garage grease mingled with whatever I was trying not to burn for dinner. I was a mechanic, a good one, with hands calloused and permanently stained with the evidence of my labor. Those hands fixed transmissions and rebuilt engines all day, and they bandaged scraped knees and braided hair all night. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, picking up shifts at a diner just to make sure Olivia had new shoes for school and that the electricity stayed on. But behind the facade of our modest life, I was still making decisions that would shape our future. Late at night, after Olivia was asleep, I would take calls from Mr. Anderson, reviewing acquisitions and expansions. The company grew exponentially under professional management, but I kept my involvement invisible. Every dollar we lived on came from my honest work at the garage. The fortune was for her future, when she was mature enough to handle it responsibly. I packed her lunch every single day from kindergarten until her high school graduation. I wrote little notes on her napkins, "You're my superstar," or "Knock 'em dead on that math test." I was the father in the front row of every school play, filming with a shaky hand, my heart swelling with a pride so fierce it physically hurt. When she was 8 and broke her arm falling off her bike, I slept in the hospital chair for 3 nights, leaving only to shower and change clothes at the garage. When she was 12 and Sarah Mitchell called her weird for not having designer clothes, I held her while she cried and then drove to 3 different thrift stores to find her the perfect vintage jacket that made her feel special again. I was the one who taught her to drive in the empty parking lot behind my shop, my nerves frayed as she jerked the clutch and stalled the engine of my old pickup truck. I was the one who stayed up until 2 a.m. helping her with algebra, even though I'd been under the hood of cars for 12 hours. I was the one who held her through her first heartbreak, letting her cry into my worn-out flannel shirt, while I told her that any boy who didn't see her value was a fool. But there were moments when I almost told her the truth. When she was 16 and crying because we couldn't afford the senior trip to Europe that all her classmates were taking, I came so close to revealing everything. When she got accepted to her dream college but worried about student loans, my hand hovered over the phone to call the trust administrators. Each time, something held me back. I wanted her to earn her achievements, to know the satisfaction of working for what she had. For 22 years, my world didn't just revolve around her. She was the sun, the moon, and all the stars. And she loved me for it. She would throw her arms around my neck, breathe in the smell of motor oil and cheap soap, and tell me I was the best dad in the entire world. I believed it because she believed it. That was our life. It was small, it was a struggle, but it was built on a foundation of pure unconditional love. That was my first mistake, believing any love was truly unconditional. The first crack in our perfect world came during her senior year of high school. Mrs. Patterson, her guidance counselor, had been pushing Olivia towards state schools, practical choices that fit our apparent financial situation. But Olivia had bigger dreams. She'd been accepted to Northwestern, her top choice, but the tuition was astronomical. "Dad," she said one evening, fidgeting with her acceptance letter, "what if I took a gap year? I could work, save money." I should have told her then, should have revealed that I could write a check for her entire education without blinking. Instead, I made another choice that would haunt us both. "You're going to Northwestern," I said firmly. "I'll figure out the money." I took out loans in my name, loans I didn't need, but that maintained the illusion. I picked up extra shifts at the diner, worked weekends at a second garage across town. To Olivia, it looked like I was killing myself to pay for her education. To me, it was just another layer of the life I'd constructed for her benefit. College changed her as it should have. She made friends from wealthy families, saw how the other half lived. When she came home for Christmas her freshman year, I noticed the small changes. She commented on our tiny apartment, suggested I upgrade my phone, asked why I didn't invest in better work clothes. I brushed it off as natural college kid observations, but a seed of worry had been planted. The worries grew during her sophomore year when she started dating Marcus Wellington, a boy from old East Coast money. She brought him home for spring break and I watched him try to hide his shock at our modest circumstances. He was polite enough. But I caught the way his eyes lingered on our second-hand furniture, our small television, the stack of bills on the kitchen counter that I couldn't hide quickly enough. "Your dad seems nice," I overheard him tell Olivia later that evening. The pause before nice said everything. Their relationship didn't last through the summer, but the damage was done. I began to notice Olivia looking at our life through his eyes, seeing poverty where before she'd seen home. The past came knocking not with a bang, but with the purr of a European luxury car pulling up to our modest apartment building. A year after Olivia's college graduation, Helen was back. She didn't look like the scared girl who had run away. She was polished, sculpted, dressed in clothes that cost more than my monthly rent. And she wasn't alone. Beside her was Gregory Baker, her husband. He was tall, silver-haired, with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. He shook my hand with a grip that was meant to convey power, his eyes scanning our tiny living room with a look of barely concealed pity. I knew about Gregory Baker, of course. Through my business connections, I'd been aware of his rise in local real estate development. He was leveraged to the eyeballs, building an empire on borrowed money and aggressive expansion. From a financial standpoint, he was impressive but precarious. From a personal standpoint, watching him put his arm possessively around my daughter's mother made my jaw clench. They didn't come with apologies. They came with weapons of mass destruction, gift cards to designer stores, tickets to Paris for a girls' trip, a down payment on a new car for Olivia. They spun tales of their life, the country club, the yacht, the bigger house, and a gated community on the other side of the city. I watched as my daughter, the girl who used to find joy in a shared pizza on a Friday night, became mesmerized by the blinding glare of their wealth. "Olivia could stay with us for a while," Helen suggested during that first visit, her voice honey-sweet with manipulation. "There's so much room in the house, she could have her own wing." "I have my own apartment now," Olivia said, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. "That tiny place?" Gregory laughed, not meanly but with the casual cruelty of someone who'd never known want. "Sweetheart, you could fit 3 of those apartments in our guest quarters." The change was gradual at first. A missed Sunday dinner here, an unanswered phone call there, then it became more pronounced. She started making little comments, casual daggers that slid between my ribs without her even noticing. "Dad, the air conditioning in your car is so loud. Gregory says I have a real eye for fashion, I just never had the chance to develop it. Their house is just, it's breathtaking, you can't imagine." "Oh, but I could imagine it perfectly. I could also imagine the price tag that came with it, and I wasn't talking about money. I was talking about the price of a daughter's loyalty, the cost of 22 years of love." The Sunday dinners became monthly, then occasional. Our phone calls grew shorter, filled with updates about her new life that felt like reports from a foreign country. She started bringing me gifts, expensive wine that I'd never drink, designer tools that were too precious to use in my garage. Each gift felt like pity, like charity from her new elevated position. I tried to bridge the growing gap. I suggested we take a vacation together, just the two of us, like we used to when she was younger. She agreed, but when the time came, she canceled. Gregory had surprised her with tickets to Napa Valley, a wine tasting tour that conflicted with our modest camping trip. "Rain check, Dad," she said, but we both knew there wouldn't be one. I watched from a distance as she transformed. The girl who used to wear my old flannel shirts now appeared in Facebook photos wearing designer dresses at charity galas. The daughter who used to help me change oil now posted pictures of herself on yachts, champagne glass in hand, Gregory's arm around her shoulders like he'd been there all along. The phone call came on a Tuesday. I was under a vintage Mustang, my hands covered in grime, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Olivia. Her voice was bright but brittle. "Dad, hi, so Kyle and I set a date," she chirped. Kyle Stewart, her fiancé, a young man who seemed to be surgically attached to Gregory's wallet. She'd met him at the country club, another sign of how far her orbit had shifted from mine. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. When's the big day?" I asked, my heart doing a familiar leap of joy for her. Despite everything, I was genuinely happy for her happiness. There was a pause, a terrible heavy silence that I could feel weighing down the phone line. "It's in 3 months," she finally said, "and Dad, we need to talk about the ceremony." I knew, even before the words left her mouth, a cold dread washed over me. I'd seen this coming for months, watching Gregory insert himself into every corner of her life. He'd been at her college graduation, sitting in the seat that should have been mine. He'd given her advice on job interviews, using his connections to land her a position at a marketing firm. He'd even been the one to introduce her to Kyle, orchestrating their relationship like a chess master moving pieces on a board. "Gregory has been so wonderful to me, Dad. He's become like a second father." A second father? I, who had been her only father for 22 years, was now being demoted. The man who had never changed a single diaper, never stayed up all night when she had the flu, never sacrificed a single dream for her well-being, had somehow earned equal status in the 3 years since he'd entered her life. And well, we all think it would be for the best, less awkward for everyone, if Gregory walked me down the aisle. The wrench in my hand slipped, clattering to the concrete floor. I couldn't breathe. I squeezed my eyes shut, the darkness behind my eyelids a welcome relief from the sudden, blinding pain. Awkward. My presence at my own daughter's wedding would be awkward. "Please don't be upset, Dad," she pleaded, her voice sounding distant and hollow, as if she were speaking through a tunnel. "It's just, he's paid for so much of the wedding and it would mean so much to Mom and—" She was giving me reasons, justifications, trying to make the amputation sound surgical rather than savage. But each word was another twist of the knife. He'd paid for the wedding. Of course he had. The man I could have bought and sold 100 times over had purchased my daughter's loyalty with champagne and flowers. "You'll still be there," she continued, desperation creeping into her voice. "You'll have a seat in the front row. It's not like you're not invited." But I wasn't upset, I wasn't angry, I was hollowed out. I had given every piece of myself to raise her. Sacrificed every dream, every opportunity, every moment of my own happiness, and in the end, I was being replaced by a man with a bigger house and deeper pockets. "I understand," I whispered, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. "I just want you to be happy, Olivia." "Really?" The relief in her voice was palpable. "Oh, Dad, thank you for understanding. I knew you'd be okay with it. You're the best." The best father who ever lived, according to her childhood declarations. The best father who would now sit in the audience while another man gave away the daughter I'd raised alone. After I hung up, I lay there on the cold concrete for a long time, staring up at the undercarriage of the Mustang. The engine oil mixed with the silent tears tracking paths through the grime on my face. I thought about all the father-daughter dances we'd shared in our tiny living room, her small feet standing on mine as we swayed to whatever song was playing on the radio. I thought about the promises I'd whispered to her as a baby, swearing I'd never let anyone hurt her, never let her down. I thought that was the lowest I could feel. I thought that was the ultimate betrayal. I was wrong. The worst was yet to come. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, I wasn't invited to. No, that's not fair. I was invited. I was invited to sit quietly in the audience like any other guest, watching the spectacle of my daughter's transformation into someone I no longer recognized. The invitations were elaborate, gold-embossed affairs that probably cost more than most people spent on their entire weddings. Mine arrived with a personal note from Olivia. "Can't wait for you to see how beautiful everything is. Love, Livy." She hadn't called herself Livy since she was 12. The resurrection of her childhood nickname felt like mockery. I threw myself into my work, trying to sweat out the heartbreak, trying to forget the image of another man taking my place. My regular customers began to worry. I was working 16-hour days, taking on jobs that should have been spread across weeks. My hands, always steady, began to shake from exhaustion. My assistant Miguel finally cornered me in the office. "Boss, you need to go home, you look like death." "I'm fine," I insisted, but we both knew it was a lie. "This is about Olivia, isn't it?" Miguel had worked for me for 8 years. He'd watched Olivia grow up, seen her transition from the sweet kid who helped organize tools to the polished young woman who barely acknowledged him when she visited. I didn't answer, but I didn't need to. Miguel had daughters of his own. "She's making a mistake," he said simply. "But people have to make their own mistakes. You can't fix everything with a wrench and elbow grease." He was right, but knowing that didn't make it hurt less. The worst part was the silence. Olivia, who used to call me 3 times a week just to chat, went radio silent. I'd get occasional updates through social media, photos of dress fittings, cake tastings, flower arrangements, but no personal calls. No "Dad, I'm nervous," or "Dad, I need your advice," or "Dad, I can't wait for you to meet Kyle's parents." I was being systematically erased from the biggest moment of her life. When I did hear from her, it was through Helen, who had somehow appointed herself as the family spokesperson. She called me 2 weeks before the wedding with a list of instructions that felt more like demands. "David, we need to discuss the seating arrangements," she said without preamble. "Gregory's parents will be sitting in the front row, and obviously Kyle's family needs prominent placement. We've reserved a seat for you in the third row. Third row, behind Gregory's business associates and Helen's book club friends. Also," she continued, "we're having a rehearsal dinner, but it's really just for the immediate family and wedding party. I'm sure you understand." I understood perfectly. I understood that the man who had raised their daughter for 22 years was not considered immediate family. Then 1 week before the wedding, the final blow landed. It wasn't a call, it was a text message, clinical and cold. "Hey Dad, just wanted to let you know the paperwork went through. I've officially changed my last name to Baker. It felt right to match the family. I'm finally free." I stared at the phone screen, reading the message over and over, each word burning itself into my brain like a brand. Free. She felt free. The name I'd given her, the name that connected her to generations of strength and perseverance, was a chain she needed to break. Followed by a second text a moment later. "It's nothing personal, I just wanted to escape the name Jones. It sounds so common." Common? The word hit me like a physical blow. The name Jones was common to her. The name of the grandfather who had built an empire from nothing was common. The name of the father who had sacrificed everything for her was common. I sat in my empty garage, surrounded by the tools and machinery that had paid for her entire life, and I felt something inside me crack. Not break, crack, like ice under pressure, holding together but fundamentally changed. She thought she was shedding the skin of her simple past for a glittering future. What she didn't realize is that she hadn't just shed her skin, she had severed an artery. She had cut herself off from the very source of the wealth she was so desperate to marry into. I stared at the screen, the words blurring. Escape. Free. Common. She hadn't just disowned me, she had renounced my very identity, the only thing my father had left me, the name that carried the weight of 3 generations of Jones men who had built something from nothing. My heart didn't just break, it froze. The warmth of 22 years of love was extinguished, replaced by something cold, hard, and clear. The grief was still there, but now it had a partner: resolve. I picked up my phone and made a call I hadn't made in years. "Mr. Anderson," I said, my voice steady, devoid of the emotion that was raging inside me. "It's David Jones." There was a surprised silence on the other end. James Anderson had been my family's lawyer for 40 years, the man who had managed the trusts and holdings that I'd walked away from to give my daughter a normal life. He'd been patient with my long absence from corporate affairs, understanding my desire to raise Olivia in a simpler world. "David, my goodness, it's been a long time. Is everything all right?" "Everything is about to be set right," I said. "I need you to pull up the charter for Jones Consolidated, specifically the succession clause, Article 7, I believe." "Of course," he said, the rustling of papers audible over the phone. I could picture him in his mahogany-paneled office, the same office where my grandfather had signed the original documents decades ago. Ah, yes, Article 7, the Bloodline Clause. Control and ownership of all assets held in the primary trust shall pass only to a direct descendant of the founder who legally bears the Jones surname upon their 25th birthday or their date of legal marriage, whichever comes first. It's unbreakable, David. Your grandfather made sure of that after your great-uncle tried to contest the will. Why do you ask? My grandfather had been a careful man. He'd seen families torn apart by money, had watched empires crumble when heirs fought over inheritance. The bloodline clause was his insurance policy, ensuring that only someone truly committed to the family name could inherit the family fortune. I leaned back in my chair, the worn leather groaning in protest. My daughter Olivia is getting married next Saturday. That's wonderful news. My congratulations to her. Will you be bringing her by to discuss the succession? At 25, she'll be eligible for. She is marrying into the Baker family. Gregory Baker, I said, letting the name hang in the air. Mr. Anderson was sharp. He'd been managing corporate acquisitions for 4 decades. Baker Industries, they're heavily leveraged, David. One of their principal creditors is Sterling Holdings. Interesting coincidence. And who owns Sterling Holdings, Mr. Anderson? I asked, though I already knew the answer. A sharp intake of breath. We do, it's one of our shell corporations. David, you don't mean. Precisely, I said. Olivia has also, as of today, legally renounced the Jones name. She is now, for all legal intents and purposes, Olivia Baker. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. James Anderson understood immediately. He'd administered the trust for long enough to know every clause, every condition, every ironclad requirement that my grandfather had built into the foundation of our family's wealth. My word, he whispered, she's disinherited herself completely and irrevocably. Yes, I said, a strange calm washing over me like cool water after a fever. She wanted to escape the name, now she has. She thought she was closing a chapter. What she actually did was sign a contract she didn't read the fine print on. David, I have to ask, did she know about the inheritance, about the company? No, I said. I kept it from her. I wanted her to have a normal childhood, to learn the value of hard work and integrity. I thought I'd tell her when she was ready, when she was mature enough to handle the responsibility. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Turns out she was never going to be ready. This is a catastrophe. The inheritance alone is worth $47 million, I finished, plus controlling interest in a conglomerate valued at just over $2 billion. Yes, I'm aware of what she's thrown away. Another silence, then in a voice I'd never heard from the usually composed lawyer, what do you want me to do? I closed my eyes, seeing Olivia as she was at 5 years old, dancing in our tiny kitchen while I made breakfast. Seeing her at 10 helping me change the oil in our old Honda. Seeing her at 15 crying on my shoulder after her first heartbreak. All those moments, all that love, all those sacrifices reduced to a text message about escaping my common name. Get the car ready for next Saturday, James. I think I'll attend this wedding after all, not as a father but as the chairman of the board. The days leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of preparation. I hadn't set foot in the corporate world for over 2 decades, but it came back to me like riding a bicycle. James briefed me on the current state of the company, the various holdings and acquisitions that had occurred during my absence. Jones Consolidated had grown exponentially under professional management, becoming a silent giant in multiple industries. The timing is almost poetic, James observed during one of our meetings. Baker Industries has been struggling for the past year. They've borrowed heavily to fund expansion, and most of their debt is held by our subsidiaries. One phone call from you and Gregory Baker's empire crumbles. I don't want to destroy him, I said, surprising myself with the admission. I want him to understand exactly who he's been dismissing as a simple mechanic. James nodded, shock and awe. I understand. The psychological impact will be far more devastating than simple financial ruin. On the morning of the wedding, I did something I hadn't done in 23 years. I put on the suit. It had been custom tailored for me by the finest clothier in the city, a man who had dressed my father and grandfather before me. Despite the years, it still fit perfectly. The dark charcoal wool was timeless, the cut impeccable. I looked in the mirror and saw my father looking back at me, the commanding presence, the quiet authority, the weight of responsibility that came with power. I was no longer David Jones the mechanic. I was David Jones, chairman of the board, heir to an industrial empire, a man who could change lives with a signature. The day of the wedding was beautiful. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, a perfect mockery of the storm brewing inside me. I didn't go to the church. I couldn't bear to watch Gregory Baker place my daughter's hand in another man's. I couldn't watch her say, "I do," and seal her fate with a man who saw her as a trophy rather than the miracle she was. My part in this story began at the reception. It was held at the most exclusive country club in the state, a place where memberships were inherited rather than purchased. Valets in crisp uniforms parked cars that cost more than most people's houses. Women in silk dresses and men in tailored suits drifted across a perfectly manicured lawn, champagne flutes in hand, their laughter mixing with the sound of a string quartet. It was a world away from my life, from the life I had given Olivia. But it was also a world that I could have provided for her from birth if I'd chosen differently. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was financing this entire display through my various corporate holdings. I didn't use the valet. Mr. Anderson drove me himself in a discreet black sedan that was far more expensive than it looked. I wasn't wearing my mechanic's jumpsuit. I wore the custom-tailored suit of dark charcoal wool that had been sitting in my closet for a decade, a remnant from a life I'd abandoned for love. As I stepped out of the car, I felt the weight of transformation settling around me like armor. I was no longer the man who packed lunches and braided hair. I was power incarnate, wealth personified, a force that could reshape the financial landscape with a phone call. I saw them across the lawn, the happy couple making their grand entrance. Olivia looked radiant in her white dress, her smile wide and bright. She was laughing at something Kyle said, completely oblivious to the hurricane that was about to tear through her perfect day. Helen and Gregory stood nearby, beaming like proud peacocks. They had won, or so they thought. They had taken my daughter and remade her in their image. I entered through a side door, a ghost at the feast. I took a glass of water from a passing waiter. I needed a clear head for what was coming and stood in the shadows at the back of the grand ballroom watching. The reception was everything money could buy: ice sculptures, cascading flowers, a five-tier cake that looked more like architecture than dessert. Every detail screamed expense, screamed status, screamed the kind of wealth that Gregory Baker was desperate to project. I saw the toasts. I heard Gregory give a speech about how he was so proud to finally have a daughter, conveniently omitting the fact that she had a father who had raised her for 22 years. His words were polished, confident, delivered with the easy charm of a man who'd never been denied anything he wanted. "When Helen first told me about Olivia," he said, raising his champagne glass, "I knew I was getting more than a wife, I was getting a daughter. And what a daughter she's turned out to be: beautiful, intelligent, sophisticated, everything a father could want." The applause was thunderous. I felt every word like a physical blow, but my expression remained neutral. The cold resolve in my heart had become a suit of armor, protecting me from the pain while allowing me to function with crystal clarity. I waited for the perfect moment. It came after the dinner plates had been cleared, after the cake had been cut, after the first dance had been completed. The guests were relaxed now, mellowed by good food and expensive wine. Gregory Baker was holding court near the bar, laughing loudly with a group of men who were clearly his business associates. He was in his element, the king in his castle, the master of all he surveyed. I began to walk toward them, my steps measured and deliberate. As I moved through the crowd, I noticed heads turning. There was something about my bearing, my presence, that commanded attention even from people who didn't know who I was. As I approached Gregory's circle, Olivia saw me. Her smile faltered, a flicker of confusion and panic in her eyes. She looked beautiful, radiant, but there was something different about her. The girl I'd raised would have run to me, thrown her arms around my neck despite her wedding dress. This woman, this stranger wearing my daughter's face, looked at me like an inconvenience. She started to move toward me, probably to ask me to leave, to not cause a scene on her special day. But Helen put a restraining hand on her arm, whispering something to her. Their gazes were fixed on me, a mixture of annoyance and embarrassment. They thought I was there to make a scene, to drunkenly protest my replacement, to embarrass them in front of their carefully curated guest list. I ignored them. My focus was solely on Gregory Baker and his associates. As I reached their circle, one of the men recognized me, though his brain struggled to place the face. I could see him thinking, "Isn't that the mechanic? What's he doing here in that suit?" Gregory saw me and his smile turned into a condescending sneer. The champagne had made him bold, confident in his superiority. "David, I must say I'm surprised to see you here. I thought we had an understanding about keeping things appropriate. We did, I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the relative lull. I'm not here as a guest. He chuckled, a nasty, dismissive sound that carried all the arrogance of a man who'd never been challenged. Well, you're certainly not here as family, so what is it? Did you come to wish them well, maybe slip them a 20 for their honeymoon? His friends laughed at that, the cruel laughter of men who'd never known want, never understood struggle. They saw me as entertainment, a curiosity from the bride's unfortunate past. No, I said, turning my attention to the man standing next to him, an investor named Peterson whom I recognized from financial magazines. I came to have a word with Mr. Peterson about the Baker Industries portfolio. Peterson looked confused, clearly trying to reconcile my appearance with my words. I'm sorry, do I know you? Gregory cut in, his voice dripping with contempt. This is Olivia's biological father. He's a mechanic. He doesn't know anything about portfolios or business or anything else that matters in the real world. The dismissal was complete, total, 22 years of raising his wife reduced to biological father. My honest work degraded to irrelevance. Everything I was, everything I'd sacrificed, dismissed with a wave of his manicured hand. I met Gregory's gaze, and for the first time in over 20 years, I let him see exactly who I was. The cold armor inside me now radiated outward, and something in my expression made his smirk falter slightly. My name is David Jones, and you're right, I do fix cars. It's an honest living. But what I also do, Mr. Baker, is chair the board of Jones Consolidated. The name hit the air and seemed to suck all the oxygen out of it. Peterson's eyes widened in recognition. The other men fell silent. Jones Consolidated wasn't a flashy public name, wasn't splashed across billboards or sports stadiums. But in their world, the world of high finance and corporate power, it was a name whispered with reverence and fear. It was a silent giant, a holding company with tentacles reaching into dozens of industries, assets so vast they were almost mythical. Gregory's smug expression melted away like ice in the sun, replaced by a ghastly, pale confusion. His mouth worked silently, his brain frantically trying to process what he'd just heard. That's not possible, he finally managed. That's a ridiculous lie. Is it? I asked calmly. I reached into my jacket pocket and withdrew a business card, simple, elegant, with the Jones Consolidated logo embossed in gold. I handed it to Peterson, who studied it with the reverence of a man handling a religious artifact. Jesus Christ, Peterson breathed, it's really you. I turned back to Gregory, whose face had gone from pale to ashen. As you know, your firm's largest investor is Sterling Holdings, and as of last year, Jones Consolidated acquired a 100% stake in Sterling. Which means, Mr. Baker, I said, finally turning my full, icy attention back to him, that the man you just called a simple mechanic happens to own the company that holds the debt on nearly every asset you claim to your name. Your house, your cars. And most importantly, your business. The silence was absolute. The string quartet seemed to fade into nothing. Conversations at nearby tables stopped mid-sentence as people sensed the shift in atmosphere, the way animals sense an approaching storm. Gregory's champagne flute slipped from his nerveless fingers, shattering against the marble floor with a sound like breaking dreams. Helen's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror as the implications began to sink in. Kyle, standing a few feet away with his groomsmen, looked confused but increasingly alarmed as he watched his new father-in-law's world crumble in real time. And Olivia, my beautiful daughter standing there in her perfect white dress, looked as if she had been struck by lightning. Her face was a canvas of pure, uncomprehending shock. She looked from me to Gregory, then back to me, her mind frantically trying to connect the man who smelled of grease and fixed her bike chain with the titan of industry they were all staring at. The transformation was visible, like watching someone solve a puzzle that had been tormenting them for years. Every childhood memory was being rewritten, every sacrifice recontextualized. The father who worked 3 jobs to pay for her shoes wasn't struggling, he was choosing to live modestly. The man who took out loans for her college tuition could have endowed an entire university. You, Gregory sputtered, his face cycling through emotions like a broken slot machine. Disbelief, fear, rage, and finally, a dawning comprehension of just how thoroughly he'd been outplayed. You can't, you don't have the right. I have every right, I said, my voice flat and final. And I will. Mr. Anderson will be in touch with your legal team on Monday morning to discuss the immediate calling in of all outstanding loans. I believe the term is lock, stock, and barrel. Peterson was frantically scrolling through his phone, probably pulling up financial records, confirming what he already knew to be true. The other men in Gregory's circle had backed away as if proximity to him might be contagious. In their world, being on the wrong side of Jones Consolidated was a death sentence. "Wait," Gregory said, desperation creeping into his voice. "We can discuss this. Business is business, right? There's no need to be hasty. We're family now." The word family hung in the air like a curse. I let it settle. Let everyone present absorb the irony of Gregory Baker claiming family ties to the man he just dismissed as irrelevant. "Family," I repeated softly, and there was something in my tone that made several people take an involuntary step backward. "You used that word when you convinced my daughter to legally renounce the name that would have made her one of the wealthiest women in the country. You used that word when you took my place at her wedding. You used that word when you erased 22 years of sacrifice and love." I let the words hang there, a death sentence for the life he had built, the life he had used to steal my daughter. Then I allowed myself to look at Olivia. Her beautiful wedding day was ruined, her face as white as her dress. Her eyes were filled with a dawning, terrible understanding. "The bloodline clause," she whispered, and I knew that somewhere in the chaos of her mind, she was remembering fragments of conversations, offhand comments about family history that she'd never paid attention to. "Article 7, I confirmed. "Only a direct descendant bearing the Jones surname can inherit. You wanted to escape that name, remember? You said it was common." The word hit her like a physical blow. I watched 24 years of life crumble behind her eyes as she finally understood what she had thrown away. Not just money, though the fortune she'd forfeited could have funded small nations, but legacy, purpose, the chance to build something meaningful with the foundation her ancestors had laid. I walked over to her, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence that had fallen over the reception. She flinched as I approached, as if she expected me to strike her. "You said you wanted to escape the name Jones," I said, my voice soft now for her ears only. The anger was gone, replaced only by a profound, aching sadness. "Congratulations, you're free, you're a baker now, I hope it was worth it." I didn't wait for an answer. I turned my back on the wreckage of her perfect day and walked out of the ballroom, leaving the ghost of who I was behind me and stepping back into a world I had abandoned for her sake. The silence that followed my departure was, I was told later, the loudest sound anyone had ever heard. But I wasn't finished. As I reached the exit, I turned back one final time. The entire reception had ground to a halt, hundreds of guests frozen in tableau as they processed what they'd just witnessed. "Oh, and Gregory," I called out, my voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "That lovely country club membership you're so proud of, the one you used to impress my daughter, Jones Consolidated owns 60% of this establishment. Consider your membership revoked." The aftermath was swift and brutal. Just as I'd promised, on Monday morning the financial guillotine fell. Baker Industries, built on a mountain of debt and leveraged promises, crumbled in a matter of days. The calls were made, the notes were due, and Gregory Baker had nothing to offer but bluster and desperate attempts to negotiate. But I wasn't interested in negotiation. This wasn't business, it was justice, cold, calculated, and absolute. The bigger house went into foreclosure within the week. The luxury cars were repossessed from their circular driveway in the dead of night, towed away by crews that didn't care about the embarrassment they caused. The country club membership wasn't the only thing revoked. Their credit was destroyed, their assets frozen, their entire glittering world dissolved into dust. The news reports were discreet at first, talking of a hostile creditor action and corporate restructuring. The financial press spoke in euphemisms about over-leveraging and market corrections, but those in the know understood exactly what was happening. David Jones, the ghost of the corporate world, had returned to settle a very personal score. Helen and Gregory's marriage didn't survive the first month. When she realized that the wealth and status she'd married for was not only gone but had been deliberately destroyed by the man she'd abandoned 23 years earlier, she filed for divorce with a speed that would have been impressive if it hadn't been so pathetic. She tried to claim half of Gregory's remaining assets, only to discover that there were none. The prenuptial agreement she'd signed protected her from his debts, but it also left her with nothing when those debts consumed everything he owned. Kyle, the ambitious young husband who had married into what he thought was a dynasty, lasted even less time. When he found out that the dynasty was not only broke but massively in debt to his wife's common biological father, he vanished like smoke. 3 months after their lavish wedding, a wedding that I now realized had been paid for with my own money through the complex web of subsidiaries and holdings, he filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. The irreconcilable difference, of course, was that he'd married a wealthy heiress and ended up with a broke nobody whose own father had disowned her. I didn't revel in it. There was no joy in watching their downfall, no satisfaction in seeing the pain I'd caused. It was just a consequence, an equation balancing itself out. Actions had repercussions, choices had prices, and sometimes those prices were higher than anyone could have imagined. I continued to live in my small apartment, continued to go to the garage every day. The suit went back in the closet and the calloused, grease-stained hands went back to work. My life hadn't changed externally, but inside something fundamental had shifted. The warmth that had sustained me for 22 years was gone, replaced by something colder but perhaps more honest. Miguel noticed the difference immediately. "You're different, boss," he said one afternoon as we worked on a classic Corvette. "Since the wedding, you're harder." He was right. The unconditional love that had defined my existence for over 2 decades had been revealed as conditional after all. Conditional on status, on wealth, on the approval of people who had never earned the right to judge. The realization had burned away something essential in me, leaving behind a clearer but lonelier perspective. "People change," I said simply. "Yeah, but not usually overnight, and not usually for the better." I looked up from the engine I was working on. "You think this is for the worse." Miguel considered this. "I think you were happier when you were lying to yourself about who your daughter really was." He was right, of course, but happiness built on lies isn't really happiness at all, it's just delayed disappointment. The calls from Olivia started 2 weeks after the wedding. I didn't answer them. I listened to the voicemails, though, each one more desperate than the last. "Dad, please call me back, I need to explain." "Dad, I know you're angry, but we need to talk." "Dad, Kyle left." "Mom and Gregory are getting divorced, everything is falling apart." "Dad, please, I'm scared." That last one almost broke my resolve. The scared little girl in her voice was the same scared little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. But I hardened my heart against the memory. The scared little girl had grown up to become someone who could look at 22 years of love and call it common. Then came the night I had been expecting. It was late and a cold rain was lashing against my window panes. The knock came at my door just after midnight, hesitant, desperate, the sound of someone who had nowhere else to go. I opened it to find her standing there, soaked to the bone, shivering, her face pale and tear-streaked. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by simple jeans and a worn-out jacket that I recognized from her college years. She looked like the girl I had raised, not the stranger she had become. Her hair was plastered to her head from the rain, and she was carrying a single suitcase that looked like it contained everything she owned. The contrast to the radiant bride I'd seen just months before was stark and devastating. "Dad," she whispered, her voice cracking like ice under pressure. I didn't say anything, I just stepped aside and let her in. She stood dripping on my worn-out welcome mat, looking around the small, familiar living room as if seeing it for the first time. It was the same home she had fled in search of something better. Now it was her only refuge. "They're gone," she sobbed, the words tumbling out between gasps. "Everything is gone, the house, the money, Kyle." "Mom blames me. She said I ruined everything. She said if I hadn't been so stupid, if I'd just kept my mouth shut about changing my name, none of this would have happened." So Helen had figured it out. Of course she had. She was many things, but stupid wasn't one of them. She would have put together the pieces, realized that her daughter's impulsive decision to shed the Jones name had cost them everything. "She told me it was my fault that Gregory lost everything," Olivia continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "She said I was just like my father, destructive and selfish, then she threw me out." The irony was almost too perfect. Helen, who had abandoned us both for a better life, was now blaming our daughter for the consequences of choices Helen herself had influenced. Olivia finally looked at me, her eyes pleading, desperate. "I was so stupid. I was so stupid. I didn't know, Dad. I swear I didn't know about the money, about the company. Why didn't you tell me?" I walked to the kitchen and poured her a cup of tea, my hands steady despite the emotional hurricane raging inside me. The simple domestic act gave me time to compose my thoughts, to choose my words carefully. I placed the steaming mug in her trembling grasp and finally spoke. Because I wanted you to be a good person before you were a wealthy one, I said, my voice calm but with an edge of steel she had never heard before. I wanted you to understand the value of hard work, integrity, and loyalty. I wanted you to choose love over money, character over comfort. I wanted to raise a daughter who would stand by the man who raised her, not abandon him the moment someone with deeper pockets came along. The words hit her like physical blows, each one finding its mark with surgical precision. But you knew I loved you, she protested weakly. No, you didn't know about the money, I continued, ignoring her interruption. But you knew I loved you, you knew I raised you alone, you knew I sacrificed everything for you. You knew I worked 3 jobs to pay for your education, slept in hospital chairs when you were sick, never missed a single important moment in your life. Was that not enough? Was my love so common that you had to escape it? The question hung in the air between us, heavy and unanswerable. I watched her face crumple as she tried to find an excuse, a justification, some way to make her betrayal sound less damning. But there wasn't one. The truth was simple and brutal. She had chosen wealth over love, status over loyalty, a stranger's approval over her father's devotion. I'm sorry, she wept, collapsing into a chair at our old kitchen table. The same table where I'd helped her with homework, where we'd eaten countless meals together, where I'd bandaged scraped knees and listened to stories about her day. I am so sorry, Dad, please forgive me, can you help me, can you fix this? This was the moment where I could be the magnanimous victor and restore her fortune, where I could prove that my love truly was unconditional, where I could demonstrate that forgiveness was stronger than justice. I sat down across from her, the old kitchen table now a battlefield of unspoken pain. This was the crossroads where I would define not just her future but my own character. Would I be the loving father who forgave everything, or the wounded man who demanded payment for betrayal? I can't fix it, Olivia, I said softly, and I saw the last flicker of hope die in her eyes like a candle being snuffed out. The family charter is ironclad, you legally renounced the name, the inheritance, the company. It's all gone for you, that door is closed forever. Her face crumpled completely, the full weight of her decision finally crushing her. She wasn't crying for her lost wealth, money she'd never known existed until it was gone. She was crying for the recognition that her choices had consequences, that some mistakes couldn't be undone with apologies and tears. The bloodline clause was my grandfather's insurance policy, I continued, my voice gentle but implacable. He'd seen too many family fortunes destroyed by greed, too many legacies squandered by heirs who cared more about the money than the name it came with. So he made sure that only someone truly committed to being a Jones could inherit what the Jones family had built. I reached across the table and took her hand, the same hand I'd held when she took her first steps, when she was scared of the dark, when she graduated from high school. But now there were calluses on her fingers, evidence of the manual labor she'd been forced to take on since her world collapsed. You chose a bigger house over the man who built your entire world, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Houses can be rebuilt, trust is a different matter. She squeezed my hand desperately, clinging to the physical connection like a drowning person clutching driftwood. But that doesn't mean you've lost a father, I continued, and her head snapped up, a spark of desperate hope flickering in her eyes. I will not let you be homeless, I will not let you starve, but I will not give you a single dollar that you do not earn. The life of privilege you tasted is over. I leaned forward, my voice taking on the tone I'd used when she was a child and needed to learn an important lesson. I hid the wealth for a reason, Olivia, to protect you from the poison it brings. I wanted you to grow up knowing the value of hard work, integrity, and loyalty. I wanted you to be a good person, not a rich one. You failed that test spectacularly. She flinched as if I'd struck her, but she didn't let go of my hand. So here is my offer, I said, my voice hardening with resolve. There is an entry-level position in the marketing department at one of the smaller subsidiary companies. You will start at the bottom. You will earn a modest salary, you will live in a small apartment, pay your own bills, and you will learn what it means to work for what you have. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. You will learn the value of a name not by what it can buy you, but by the character of the person who bears it. Maybe, someday, you'll understand what you threw away. Maybe someday you'll be worthy of the Jones name, even if you can never legally claim it again. She stared at me, speechless. It wasn't the answer she wanted. She'd probably hoped I would wave my hand and restore her to her previous status, make all the consequences disappear with executive power and unlimited resources. But it was the answer she needed. It was a lifeline, not a lottery ticket. It was a path to redemption, a long, hard road that she would have to walk herself. The silence stretched between us, punctuated only by the rain against the windows and her quiet sobs. Finally, slowly, agonizingly, she nodded. "Okay, Dad," she whispered, "okay." But I wasn't finished, there was more she needed to understand. "There are conditions," I said, my voice taking on the authority I'd learned in boardrooms but never used with her before. "You will have no contact with Gregory Baker or anyone associated with his family. You will not use my name or our relationship to gain any advantage in business or society. You will live as Olivia Baker, the name you chose, and you will make your own way in the world." She nodded again, more vigorously this time. "And one more thing," I said, my voice softening slightly. "If you ever try to exploit this situation, if you sell your story to the media, if you use our family's tragedy for personal gain, I will cut you off completely. No job, no help, no contact. You will be truly on your own." The threat wasn't idle. I'd learned that love without boundaries wasn't love at all. It was enablement. If I was going to help her rebuild her life, it would be on terms that actually helped her grow rather than simply rescuing her from the consequences of her choices. "I understand," she said, her voice small but steady. "I understand and I accept." The relationship we had was gone forever. It shattered the day she chose a stranger over me, dissolved completely when she called my name common and threw away 22 years of love for a bigger house and social status. But that night, in the quiet of my small apartment with the rain still beating against the glass, we laid the first, tentative brick of something new. It wouldn't be built on the bedrock of unconditional love that had sustained us before. That foundation had proven to be quicksand, shifting, and unreliable when tested by wealth and social pressure. This new relationship would be built on something harder but more durable: mutual respect, earned trust, and the understanding that love without accountability isn't love at all. She slept on my couch that night, the first time she'd been in my apartment in over 2 years. I heard her crying softly in the darkness, grieving not just for her lost fortune but for her lost innocence, for the comfortable lie that she was a good person who would never hurt the people who loved her. In the morning, I made her breakfast: scrambled eggs and toast, the same simple meal I'd made her thousands of times during her childhood. But this time was different. This time, we both understood that nothing would ever be the same again. "I start Monday?" she asked, picking at her eggs. "Monday," I confirmed. "8 a.m. sharp. Don't be late, you won't get special treatment because you're my daughter. In fact, you'll probably be held to a higher standard." She nodded, accepting the reality of her new life. Then, unexpectedly, she looked up at me with something resembling her old smile. Will you still pack my lunch?" The question caught me off guard. For a moment, I saw the little girl she used to be, the child who looked forward to the notes I wrote on her napkins, who saved the funny ones in her school desk drawer. "No," I said quietly, "that's something you'll have to learn to do for yourself now." Her face fell slightly, but she nodded with understanding. The days of being taken care of were over. The days of taking care of herself had begun. Over the following months, I watched from a distance as she struggled with her new reality. The job I'd arranged for her was legitimately entry-level: filing documents, answering phones, organizing meetings for executives who had no idea who her father was. She made mistakes, had to work late to correct them, dealt with difficult customers and demanding bosses. It was everything I'd hoped for her. Miguel, who'd known her since she was a child, asked me once if I felt guilty about what I'd done. "She's working in some office building, taking orders from people who wouldn't have dared speak to her a year ago," he pointed out. "That's got to be hard to watch." "It is," I admitted, "but it's also necessary. She needed to learn that the world doesn't owe her anything, that respect has to be earned, that character matters more than connections. And if she never learns, if this just makes her bitter and resentful?" It was a fair question, one that kept me awake some nights. Then I'll know I raised someone who was never worthy of the Jones name to begin with. But slowly, gradually, I began to see changes. The reports I received through corporate channels were encouraging. She was punctual, professional, willing to do whatever was asked of her without complaint. She'd moved into a studio apartment in a working-class neighborhood, furnished it with items from thrift stores and garage sales. She was learning to budget, to cook, to take public transportation. She was learning to be the person I'd tried to raise her to be before wealth and privilege had offered her an easier path. 6 months after that rainy night when she'd appeared at my door, she called me, not to ask for help, not to complain about her circumstances, but simply to talk. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, her voice different, more mature, more thoughtful, "about the name, about what it means. And I understand now why Grandpa Theodore put that clause in the charter. It wasn't about the money, was it? It was about making sure that only someone who truly understood the responsibility would have the power." I felt something stir in my chest, not quite pride, but something approaching it. "The money was never the inheritance," she continued. "The real inheritance was supposed to be the values, the integrity, the commitment to something bigger than yourself, and I threw that away for what? A bigger house, expensive clothes, the approval of people who didn't even know me." "What do you think?" I asked, genuinely curious about her answer. "I think I was a fool," she said simply. "I think I had something precious and I treated it like it was worthless. I think I broke something that can never be fully repaired." The acknowledgement was more than I'd expected, more than I'd hoped for in those dark days after the wedding when I'd wondered if I'd lost my daughter forever. "Broken things can sometimes be mended," I said carefully. "They're never quite the same, but sometimes they're stronger at the broken places." "Do you think," she hesitated, then pressed on, "do you think we could try to mend things? I mean, I know I can never undo what I did, can never get back what I threw away, but maybe we could build something new." I was quiet for a long moment, considering her words. The hurt was still there, probably always would be. The betrayal had cut too deep to heal completely. But alongside the pain there was something else, a small, cautious hope that the daughter I'd raised was still there, buried beneath the mistakes and poor choices but not destroyed by them. "I'd like that," I said finally. "But it has to be earned, Olivia. Trust, once broken, doesn't repair itself. It has to be rebuilt piece by piece, choice by choice." "I understand," she said, "and I'm willing to do the work however long it takes." We started small, a phone call once a week, then twice. Coffee on Sunday mornings at the diner near my garage where she would tell me about her work, her struggles, the small victories of her new life. She never complained about the loss of luxury, never asked for help she hadn't earned. Gradually, I began to see glimpses of the person she was becoming, someone stronger, more compassionate, more aware of the value of simple things. Someone who thanked waitresses, who helped elderly customers at work, who saved money to send birthday cards to friends who were struggling. Someone who understood that character wasn't defined by what you owned, but by what you did when no one was watching. A year after our reconciliation began, she surprised me with a gift. Not something expensive, she couldn't afford expensive things anymore, but something more valuable. It was a framed photo of the two of us from her high school graduation, both of us grinning at the camera, my arm around her shoulders, her hand resting on mine. "I kept this," she said simply. "Through everything, the move to Gregory's house, the wedding, even after Kyle left and I lost the apartment. I kept it because it reminded me of who I used to be, who I want to be again." I looked at the photo, remembering that day. I'd been so proud of her, so full of hope for her future. Neither of us could have imagined the path that would lead us to this moment. "I want you to know," she continued, "that I don't expect anything from you. I don't expect forgiveness or a relationship or for you to ever trust me completely again. But I want you to know that every day I try to be someone worthy of that father in the picture, someone worthy of the name Jones, even if I can never legally bear it again." It was then that I realized something important. She had learned the lesson I'd been trying to teach her all along. The name Jones wasn't about money or inheritance or corporate power. It was about character, about integrity, about the kind of person you chose to be when the world was watching and when it wasn't. "You know," I said, looking at the photo, "there's something I never told you about your great-grandfather's will." She looked up, curious. "The bloodline clause wasn't the only condition he included. There was another provision, one that could override the name requirement under very specific circumstances." Her eyes widened, but I held up a hand before she could speak. "It's called the redemption clause," I continued. "It allows for the restoration of inheritance rights to a former heir under one condition. They must demonstrate, through at least 5 years of exemplary character and service, that they understand the true meaning of the family legacy." She stared at me, hardly daring to breathe. "It's not about the money, Olivia," I said firmly. If you choose to pursue this path, it's not because I'm handing you a fortune. It's because you're proving that you deserve the responsibility that comes with it. The responsibility to use wealth wisely to help others to build something meaningful rather than just accumulate possessions. 5 years, she repeated quietly. 5 years of the kind of life you're living now. 5 years of earning your way, helping others, proving that you understand what really matters. And even then, it would be your choice whether to accept the inheritance or continue living the life you've built for yourself. She was quiet for a long time processing this information. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and sure. I don't want it back because it's money, she said. I want it back because it's yours, because it's ours, because it represents everything I threw away and everything I want to rebuild. Then you understand what the real inheritance always was, I said, and for the first time in over a year, I felt something approaching the old warmth between us. She had thrown away a fortune to escape my name. Now she would have to work every single day to prove she was worthy of carrying the values of that name in her heart, even if she could never carry it on a legal document again. Her real inheritance wouldn't be money, it would be the second chance I was giving her. And this time she would have to earn it, lock, stock, and barrel. The relationship we were building wasn't the same as what we'd had before. It was more careful, more deliberate, built on honesty rather than blind faith. But in some ways it was stronger. It was based on choice rather than obligation, on mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice. And as I watched her walk away from our Sunday coffee, heading back to her modest apartment and her modest job, I realized that perhaps this was how it was meant to be. Perhaps the pain and betrayal and loss had been necessary to burn away everything false between us, leaving behind only what was real and lasting. She had 4 more years to prove herself. 4 more years to demonstrate that she understood what it truly meant to be a Jones. And whether she succeeded or failed, I would be there to witness it, not as the man who had given her everything, but as the father who had learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the chance to earn their own redemption. The story that began with abandonment and betrayal had become something else entirely. A story of second chances, of hard-won wisdom, and of the kind of love that's strong enough to demand better from the people we care about most. Lock, stock, and barrel.